Welcome to The Road. This is a weekly podcast of All Saints Lutheran Church. I'm your host, John Pedersen, and I serve as pastor. Each week, we reflect on faith, life, and navigating the road ahead. The language of journey is common when we think about life. It has its joys and challenges along the way, and we all need a little encouragement and guidance at times to keep us going. There's a word in the Bible, asphalia, which means truth, but it's the same root word we use in English for asphalt, if you can believe that. It's a solid surface that makes travel easier and more assured. And so every week we're going to be exploring elements of faith and life that keep us on the road. Faith isn't about living a perfect life. It's about finding our way, getting through rough spots, but seeking out those great vistas too. You can find my weekly message here, but you'll also find special conversations with guests who have insights on things like wellness, parenting, and living with unique purpose. If you appreciate this podcast, remember to subscribe where possible and share it with a friend. Here's this week's message. When you think back over your life, can you identify your most intense emotional experience? If so, there could very well be a very dominant emotion that defines that for you. Is it joy? Sadness, anger, a sense of peace? If you explore that experience more, you might find that it's more, though, than just a single emotion. There may be some layers. It's hard to be so full of joy if there haven't been some fears or pains that preceded it. And in the same way, sadness and grief may not be as intense if there hasn't been a depth of love or hope that are woven into that same moment. Reflect on it further, and you might be able to see that experience marking a turning point of some kind in your life, a clear shape to the time that came before and the time that came after. It's probably an integral part of your life story and journey. It's hard to explain it without talking about what came before and what has happened since. Reflecting on moments like that can help us better understand ourselves and our lives. Today's story of Jesus raising Lazarus is that kind of life-altering moment, even for Jesus. In fact, if it weren't for the events of Holy Week that begin next Sunday, the gospel writer John might have identified this as the high point of Jesus' ministry. Most of the time we focus on the miracle itself. A man is dead, but Jesus comes and raises him to new life. And that aspect of the story is absolutely incredible in its own way. But in the same way that you can't fully understand the depth of an emotion apart from the story that comes before and after in our own lives, you can't do that here either. We know how important this moment is to Jesus because it contains one of the most famous sentences in the Gospels. Jesus wept. It could also be translated, Jesus sobbed or burst into tears. Have you ever yourself experienced sadness that caused your whole body to shudder? That's what this word means. Jesus is moved with compassion and emotion throughout the Gospels with many people that he meets, but this one seems different. Both from the description in the story and from his emotional response, it's possible that we could talk about Mary, Martha, and Lazarus as being the closest things he had to friends. Verse 5 says that Jesus loved them. Jesus was also, of course, very close with his 12 disciples. The teacher-student relationship can, of course, be very close, as it was with Jesus, but it can also have an element of necessary distance to it as well. Maybe Mary, Martha, and Lazarus were almost like adopted family for him. Jesus wants to go back and revive Lazarus, not only for the sake of his friend Lazarus, but so that everyone will finally see who he truly is. In fact, it's the final sign in John's gospel for those looking for a sign about whether to believe and to know just who Jesus really is. This is the sign to end all signs. He has the power to raise the dead. And to understand what came before and why there's another layer of emotion here yet, you should know that Jesus has just been in Jerusalem and the area where Lazarus lived prior to this. The disciples referenced this in the reading. You might have heard it. He was nearly stoned to death by the crowd there just before this. Those who threatened him said, "It's not for a good work that we're going to stone you, but for blasphemy, because you, though only a human, are making yourself God." All of what Jesus was doing, violating Sabbath laws, people referring to him as Son of God, Son of Man, he was being seen as the Messiah, as Son of God, as divine. And I talked about this last week, but there's a real concern from the religious leaders of that time that Jesus is not of God, and he's blasphemous because he's been doing these things that are seen as inappropriate, violating the Sabbath laws, and now even raising someone from the dead. This is what is going on here. Who is this person? But what if Jesus really is Son of God, Messiah? And yet part of their concern is not simply the potential religious problem of someone claiming to be God, but there was actually another God already in the Roman Empire by the name of Caesar. The Roman emperor claimed to be divine. The empire, as they say, to use an old phrase from the West, this town ain't big enough for the two of us. This empire isn't big enough for the two of us. A Messiah who stirs up a nation's passions and hopes opposite the emperor will cause devastating problems for local authorities. When Jesus talks about going to help Lazarus, his disciples question his decision. It's risky. Do you really want to go back there? When Jesus makes the decision to go, Thomas says, "Let's go along and die with him." Everyone can read the writing on the wall. They know this is not going to end well. Okay, I guess we'll go with you, Jesus. It's going to be our lives too. Going back to raise Lazarus from the dead is a turning point in the Gospel of John and the ministry of Jesus. The raising of Lazarus is not only the last sign that Jesus performs as recorded in John, but it becomes the act that brings the religious leaders together to plot against Jesus. They say immediately after our story today, "This man is performing many miraculous signs. If we allow him to go on like this, soon everyone will believe in him. Then the Roman army will come and destroy both our temple and our nation." Caiaphas, the high priest that year, will say, "It's better for one man to die than for a whole nation to be destroyed." This is the beginning of the end. It's a sign of his ultimate power and authority, and as a result, he is a threat that cannot be allowed to go on. Jesus can see this coming. You don't need the gift of prophetic powers to see it. You just need to read the tea leaves. And so he knows that going back to raise Lazarus will mark the beginning of the end. Jesus is willing to make this sacrifice for a friend. And so it's his own grief over his friend's death, the grief of Mary and Martha that he comes face to face with, and the knowledge that his own death is coming, that is all pouring over into those words, "Jesus wept." But on this day, there is also joy and amazement at the power of life that Jesus shares. The beginning of the story offers suspense. Jesus delays going back to Lazarus. By the time they arrive, it's the fourth day since he died. His body has been placed in a cave with a stone in front of it, not too unlike the custom used upon the death of Jesus when he was placed in his tomb. According to Jewish beliefs, the soul left the body after 3 days. This puts an exclamation point on the fact that Lazarus is truly dead and not just sleeping. Jesus prays and calls out for Lazarus, and Lazarus hears his voice and is restored to life. This story is a foreshadowing of Jesus' own resurrection as well, not only his death and sacrifice. And it helps us see that what happens on Easter didn't only happen to Jesus, but to Lazarus. And it makes the promise Jesus gives to Martha that much more real for us. I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. May you live with the passion of Jesus, be filled with the hope and faith of Martha and Mary, and experience the joy of new life to come. Amen. That's this week's message. You don't have to navigate the road ahead alone. You can join with others at All Saints. Visit allsaintsmtka.org for more information. Have a great week.